Old tariffs are out and new tariffs are in. First article comes from the SCOTUS blog. Supreme Court strikes down tariffs. Da-da-da-da. In a majority ruling on presidential power, the Supreme Court on Friday struck down the sweeping tariffs that President Donald Trump imposed in a series of exclusive orders. By a vote of 6 to 3, the justices ruled that the tariffs exceed the powers given to the president by Congress under the 1977 law providing him the authority to regulate commerce during national emergencies created by foreign threats. The court did not weigh in, however, on whether or how the federal government should provide refunds to the importers who have paid the tariffs, estimated in 2025 to be at more than $200 billion. In his dissenting opinion, Justice Brett Kavanaugh suggested that the federal government, quote, may be required to refund billions of dollars to importers who paid the IEEPA tariffs, even though some importers may have already passed that cost on to consumers or others, unquote. Moreover, he added, quote, because EPA tariffs have helped facilitate trade deals worth trillions of dollars, including with foreign nationals from China to the United Kingdom to Japan, the court's decision could generate uncertainty regarding various trade agreements. That process, too, could be difficult, unquote, Kavanaugh warned. The law at the center of the case is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, known as EPA, which authorizes the president to use the law to deal with any unusual extraordinary threat, which has its source in whole or substantial part outside of the United States, to the national security, foreign policy, or economy of the United States. If the president declares a national emergency with respect to such threat, it, it if the president declares a national emergency with respect to such threat, unquote. A separate provision of the law provides that when there is a national emergency, the president may, quote, regulate importation or exportation, unquote, of, quote, property in which any foreign country or a national thereof has any interest, unquote. Lawsuit filed by small businesses and a group of states, all of which say that they're affected by the increased tariffs, were filed in a lower court, which agreed with the challengers that EPA did not authorize Trump's tariffs, but those rulings were put on hold, allowing the government to continue collecting the tariffs while the Supreme Court proceeds moved forward. Yeah, basically from there a bunch of political back and forths about tariffs and whatnot, blah blah blah. Yeah, so 63 ruling the Trump tariffs, like the whole like 50%, 30%,
Mm-hmm.
across the board, ruled illegal. Um, However, something that we I didn't bring up to you, but you probably already heard, is that after this was ruled, Trump hiked the temporary global tariffs up to 15% for everybody. At first it was 10, then he jumped it up to 15%, maximizing quote maximizing authority in wake of Supreme Court blow, unquote. So something it should be noted is that the new tariffs, at first it started out as 10, and then some reports are saying up to 15. Um, I was curious about, how come he can do tariffs here but not there. So these tariffs are temporary. The highest they can go is 15, and they only last for 150 days, which means they'll expire around July. So that's interesting. So it should be noted that tariffs aren't gone; they're just here in a different way. And I'm sure Trump will find other ways to impose more tariffs, with or without the approval of the government. But that's neither here nor there. Oh yeah, so and those like 10 to 15% tariffs, those come from like Section 232, which is for national security, and Section 301, which is for unfair trade practices. Essentially, like if another country is imposing a tariff onto us that really just upsets the balance of trade, we can impose a tariff. One example I bring up a lot was like I think I heard somewhere that American milk is tariffed and taxed like 150% in Canada. So that's an example of, well, at least I would consider unfair trade practices. Uh,
Hmm.
so I mean, the tariffs are here. They're at least going to stay till July for sure, if he doesn't find any other way. So a few things with tariffs. I, I'm sure I stated this before. I don't hate tariffs. I don't even think they're a bad idea, because if they're such a bad idea, no first developed world countries wouldn't be using them. But as I just stated, Canada has a tariff on us. United Kingdom, Europe, they've got tariffs on us, and this is before all the Trump stuff for sure. They've got tariffs on us. So if they're using it, I mean, we're the superior country, but if they're using it, it's not that bad of an idea. My issue with tariffs, at least with Trump's tariffs, is that those costs will absolutely go to the consumer. So what I mean by that is, so for example, let's say I'm in China and you're in the United States, and we make uh, plates. I price my plates because I have essentially slave labor and child labor, and with shipping and all that stuff, and there's no tariffs. Shipping and all that stuff, I will charge my plates for $10, and you have to hire Americans. You have to pay them minimum wage, but shipping isn't as bad because you're already in America, so you can charge them at $11. You are more expensive. Just based on price, people will pick my product over your product, assuming that our products are the same quality, for sure. Now, Trump imposed a tariff on China, and it's 20%. Now, I can take that 20%. That now essentially makes it, I have to sell it for $12 for my plates. You get to sell it for $11. Granted, it's more expensive than what people were going to pay to begin with. However, that being said, if I want to compete with you, your $11 to my $12, I essentially have to eat at least $1. If I want to be competitive and get more than you, I have to eat those $2 to stay at my $10. Does that make sense? So if we want to boost our economy, increase jobs, increase wages, blah blah blah, tariffs aren't entirely a bad idea. I know it's not that perfect, but that's beside the point. What gets me about these tariffs is that your plate maker here, you don't exist. There is not much of a competitor. Like, I think since like the 1990s, there was the Fair Trade Act, or somewhere between like Mexico, Canada, and a couple other countries, where we essentially would say we don't have like tariffs on you all because you're our neighbors. Well, we're gonna have a fair and equal, like, trading. So then that's where you keep hearing. Now Trump mentioned this, and a couple other presidents and wannabe presidents did, is that like our jobs are going overseas. You hear this a lot. Our jobs are going overseas. Why? Because it's cheaper to pay people in Mexico. It's cheaper to pay people in China, and yeah, yes, you do have to pay for all that extra shipping, but it's still cheaper. The corporations are taking in more profit than if their factories were in America. So we don't have factories in America. That's undisputed. Factories are going overseas. It's an issue. So when Trump imposes these tariffs, there's no competition. There's no you company making plates. It's just me. So if I'm hit with a tariff, I would just send it back to the consumer because there's no one to compete with. And that's my problem with the tariffs. Is that, now granted, Trump has stated that he's going to put the tariffs on, and even if the tariffs succeeded in the court, like they said it was legal, the problem is it takes time to build factories. It takes time to train and hire workers. It takes time to create like import resources to whatever the factory is making. That's not going to happen in a year. That's not going to happen in 2 years. I think now, this was like last year or a year before. Like, this was back when like China was like it's still a threat, but China was like having being like a real threat to Taiwan, and that's where all of our chip manufacturing is. I know, I think it was Joe Biden. I could be wrong, but they implemented like like a I don't want to say bonus, money for AI company, not AI, GPU companies and CPU companies to build factories over here. It was going to take like 10 years to just get them up and running. And Trump imposed tariffs. Let's say Joe Biden did that in 2020 or 2021, and Trump imposed tariffs in 2024. That's 6 years without a competitor. No wonder prices would go up, because there's no one to compete with. So that's my issue with the tariffs right now. Now, granted, for sure, companies are coming back. I heard somewhere that like Apple, like their glass manufacturer, they're moving that to Kentucky somewhere. I don't remember where, but they're moving to Kentucky, out of China to Kentucky. So it's coming back, but that's taken time. And well, we have a couple articles later on that discuss, well, this is why it's an issue. Um, any thoughts?
Um, let's see. Policy wise, policy wise, it's like the whole. Yeah, I was never a huge fan. I don't like tariffs. I think the U.S. is a consumer-based economy. We're not a manufacturing economy. Tariffs work best when you're a manufacturing economy, because what you're trying to do is protect local, like domestic manufacturing. Europe does it because Europe is a subsidized continent that lives off the back of American success. And so they need to find a way to stop American companies from outcompeting local European companies, which is why they need to do tariffs. China's a little bit, Canada's about basically the same thing, or if they want Canadian businesses to outcompete American businesses, they need to protect Canadian businesses with tariffs by making it more expensive to buy American products. In China, they do it mostly as like a foreign adversary thing, although I don't know what specifically China's tariffs are, but like it's probably industry specific to like tech and stuff. Also, the U.S. and China have a lot of like tech specific stuff regarding each other because that's a really sensitive area. But yeah, I don't know. I don't like tariffs. I think doing them in the first place was sort of this like pipe dream of let's bring back all of American manufacturing. I think, to be honest, I liked the way I think manufacturing responds better to carrots than sticks. I think that the CHIPS Act was a really good decision where it's like, hey, instead of like trying to make it impossible for American consumers to buy foreign goods, why don't we just give Americans more opportunities to like work in the sector or give American companies more incentive to work here, right? So if you're a company like, okay, I'm going to make X, $1 million in profits if I do it in China, but I'm going to make $1.5 million in profits and subsidies if I do it in the United States, and that's even after like having to build the factories and everything. I'll just do it in the United States. Um, I think he should have gone with like a carrots approach as opposed to a sticks approach. And also, like as per you said, like super early on, like um, it's the consumer who eats this stuff. It is an import tax. It's really hard. Like if you're a business, unless you're like some crazy ultra pro American business, you're not gonna just be like, well, we'll eat the cost, no problem. Like your billionaire CEOs are gonna be like, yeah, no problem, man. I'll take a huge cut in my thing. They're like, no, we'll maybe fire a few people and just pass the cost on to the consumer, which is what seems like it's largely been happening as per the Kavanaugh dissent. Although I don't think Kavanaugh's dissent was particularly coherent because it kind of rang of like, well, reversing them it would be logistically really difficult. And it's like, yeah, but like that'd be like saying if someone robbed. To me, it feels like, well, if someone robbed a bank, can we really, like, do we really want to arrest them? That means we'd have to like track down where they spent all that money. It's like that's really not how that works. We still have to arrest them. Um, I think Gorsuch honestly had probably the most coherent opinion on the whole thing. If you're listening, go take your time to look up Gorsuch's assenting um, opinion, where he basically calls out the a few of the people on his side for basically being hypocrites when it comes to textualism, and then the other two of the dissenting people, Kavanaugh and I don't remember who the other dissenter was. It was Kavanaugh, Thomas, and Alito. He calls out Kavanaugh and Alito for basically being like he said like hypocrites when it comes to using the major questions doctrine, which he I think correctly summarizes as a kind of ridiculous statement Not that he hasn't used it before. If you're unfamiliar, the major questions doctrine is the belief that there are some political questions that are best left up to Congress and not for the Supreme Court to decide. It's sort of their way of reversing a little bit of the decision of the that one big case that happened in like 1782 that basically gave them the power to interpret the Constitution, which was originally intended for Congress, but was then taken by the Supreme Court in that decision. And this is the way of saying, hey, when it comes to really, really big, important stuff, think, you know, tariffs and whatnot, we'll still steer clear and let the legislator handle it. And he's kind of he kind of calls it out. I was like, yeah, but people only ever deploy the major questions doctrine when it's something that is advantageous for them to deploy it on. It's like, well, if Congress not handling this benefits my side, I want to employ the major questions doctrine. I don't want this being answered because it benefits me. But if you do need something answered, well, this isn't a major question. It's an important question, sure. So there's that, and then he kind of laid into Thomas for having a very crazy opinion, which I still need to read up on. I haven't read all the opinions. Um, but yeah, I don't know. This feels pretty clear cut. I'm surprised this wasn't like 7-1. I'm really surprised Kavanaugh and Alito caved on this. Especially given the dissent that I've read from Kavanaugh. But this is like from a policy lawmaking perspective, from like an economics perspective. Yeah, I think the tariffs were just bad in the first place. This feels to me sort of like the obvious correction that was coming down the pipeline, which is why we saw so much hesitation from businesses when it came to moving back to the United States. Sure, some of them have been doing stuff like Apple and whatnot, but like these are like huge corporations. America, while we do enjoy our big companies, and I don't particularly have an issue with them per se, they're like we sort of no longer have that sort of class of like mid-sized company for the reasons you mentioned earlier of resources and whatnot going overseas, but to bring them back, making it more difficult to access the American consumer and the American labor probably isn't the play, because now if you're an American consumer or laborer, you now need to pay extra for imported goods or pay the premium it costs to produce goods domestically, because Americans are some of the most expensive labor in the world because we're some of the most talented labor in the world. We deserve good compensation. I like when Americans are filthy rich. And as a product of being filthy rich, they cost a whole lot to employ. Um, yeah, I don't know. The whole tariffs thing I think was stupid from the start. I think this was pretty obviously coming down the pipeline. And I don't I would hope that he gives up and moves on to something else, because this feels very much like a losing topic, even politically and then financially. This is just super destabilizing. Like if you're a foreign nation who wants to trade or a company that wants to do business in the United States and you don't know what you might need to pay a worker who works for your company or charge for any particular product or know if there's market certainty and that people will buy your product because you don't know where it will stand in the next, what is it? You said till July. Like
Mm-hmm.
you don't know
Yeah.
what's going to happen after July. Like 6 months, that's tiny. That's a tiny time scale on the in the world of business. Like that, like uncertainty of like 4-year elections is something that companies still have to like uh, grapple with. Like a 6-month turnaround of your product going from an additional 15% up to down 15% to like restructure maybe your pay if you're a domestic company. Like you're laying people off one moment and then next you're entirely understaffed, and then yeah, like it's very volatile, it's very dangerous, and I think it upsets the economy in a bad way. I don't think you should have done it in the first place, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, I don't think you should have done it in the first place, but we clearly differ on tariffs. Like, I should probably clarify. Like, again, I don't think tariffs should have came in last year. I don't think it should come in this year. I like, at least from my mind, and we can disagree and you can prove me wrong, but it's like the concept of, like you said there, Canada has to subsidize, Europe has to subsidize because they're competing with us. But it seems like the problem is we see people are struggling to find jobs. It's more unemployment that we've encountered. I think when again he's probably looking at the service. Okay, as a service level, dude owns a bunch of businesses. I live in an apartment, so he might know something more than I don't. But when you see a bunch of people who are complaining they don't have houses, they don't make enough money, there's not enough jobs to go around. I understand from the perspective of like put a tariff in. That way, companies will have to be like, okay, well, if I want to keep more of that money in my pocket, bring some, businesses here. That way, more people in America get hired, and they can keep like their costs down in a way, as opposed to paying that import tariff. My problem is it was immediate. Gets in. and puts tariffs on almost immediately. I think it was like a year ago, and that's my problem. I think now I know there's no way of him doing this because he couldn't because we have an election every 4 years, and then and then in between, like 2 years in between that, we have Congress elections, um, the midterms. Oh, sorry, excuse me. Um, I think what he could have done was be like, hey, we're going to impose tariffs. We need more people here to get our jobs. We want lower unemployment, but we're going to give you time. We'll give you 5, 8 years to start rebuilding your companies here. You there won't be any tariffs until that time hits. So that gives you time to start building factories here, start making jobs here, and that way we have less unemployment, we have more productivity. Because I think what's one of the problems, at least since the 90s, if I'm not mistaken, because our factories were importing, we as Americans started producing less when it comes to like cars and stuff like that, and we became more of like entertainment and like not entertainment. I mean
Mhm.
entertainment for sure, but like
We're much more a consumer economy than a producer
ugh,
economy in the past. Yeah.
there's something like I forgot what it was called, but it's like we sell like knowledge, information, something like that. I forgot what the word is,
Hmm.
but we become
Yeah,
that.
our two biggest our biggest exports are culture via Hollywood, finance via New York, and tech via like San Francisco. That's like the American. Those are like super ultra high level like products that requires like a lot of very narrow skills, and a very like wealthy society to like sustain it. Like yeah,
Yeah, so I tell that, but I think the problem
like
is if you think like I forgot what's it called. I forgot who said it, but it was I want you, at least in America, take the average intelligent person. How much faith do you have in them? Probably not a lot. Now, 50% of them are dumber than that. So, you know what I mean? Like, I've worked in a
oh
factory.
I
You
agree.
don't need big brains to work in a factory.
Hmm.
You just and worked physical laboring jobs. I've had physical labor jobs that require brains and some that don't. But I think the problem is when you have factories going overseas, that opportunity is lost. So again, I get the concept of a tariff. I do, especially when like you see like these are the numbers, unemployment's up, people aren't making enough money, blah blah blah. I see the instant to be like, okay, we'll put a tariff. I just don't think,
Hmm.
but because there's nothing to compete here, you know what I mean? So the consumers are eating it, and because the consumers are eating it, they have to pay more, which means the amount of money they have is less. It's almost like a cycle.
Hmm.
So while I don't mind it, but this whole rip the band-aid off kind of thing probably was I don't think was the best approach for it at all.
I would agree. To me, tariffs kind of feel like so when it comes to jobs like moving overseas, there's a level of like this is almost like the piracy fallacy,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is sort of the idea that like someone who's going to pirate a thing probably has a lower price range of what they're willing to pay. Um, so
Mm-hmm.
like you see this come up a lot with discussions around like video game piracy and whatnot, where it's like let's say you have like an $80 game and it sees like in Brazil, like in the US, let's say it sees like a less than 5% piracy rate. We'll call that like industry standard. Yeah, we expect about 5% of the copies, less than 5% of the copies of the game to get pirated because we know that the American consumer is pretty rich and they'll afford it. And then, or we estimate there's about less than 5% of all the copies that exist were pirated. And then you look at, somewhere like Brazil and you say, okay, well, hold on now, 30% are being pirated. Whoa, hey, we have a problem here. We need to really crack down on piracy and make them buy the game. It's like, dude, none of the people there who pirated that game, or even domestically, were ever going to buy it at $80. There's no amount of
Yeah.
security lockdown you can put on to meaningfully change that number. What you're actually seeing is just a different sector of the market. So when it comes to bringing jobs back to the United States, I feel like it's very similar where it's like someone who's employing a company that is currently employing like 6 children in Indonesia is not going to suddenly go, well, yeah, I'll start employing 6 college educated adults from America who cost me literal orders of magnitude more to employ. No, they want to pay these people cent like pennies on the dollar. Like, oh, they make 32 cents because the American dollar is stronger, so you can spend less on that particular avenue of labor. And then, this little kid making like Shein is gonna like it costs you like maybe $100 a year to employ him, whereas it might cost you like 40,000 or more to employ an American. You're just not in the same market. And then
Mm-hmm.
because the way when that happens, these companies restructure themselves to allocate that excess money elsewhere. So the money that would have gone to paying an American, that additional, let's say like you have a factory of 100 people, it costs you, $1,000 to employ all those children, whereas it might cost you, what would that be, $4 million for, is that 400K or is that $4 million? Yeah, it's $4 million to employ a factory of Americans. Well, that $4 million might be put towards shipping, towards product design, towards resources, towards CEO pay, right? That might go to
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that's already been redistributed. The business has already been restructured around the cost of labor being super low. So trying to be like, well, you need to come back to America. It's like, listen, we could and we would die as a company. We would die. Like this is not a we have 4 million in cash just sitting around floating doing nothing. We are no longer in the employ Americans market. That's not what our business does anymore. Like we're effectively game pirators now. We are no longer in the pay $80 for that game market. We can't afford that. We've restructured so much. We've changed how our business works so much that to overhaul our business would effectively destroy us, right? We can't keep up our current logistics services and keep price at, X level if we then hire Americans because now the shipping will take you 4 weeks and Americans won't tolerate that. We'll go out of business, right? Like we literally cannot sustain the employment of Americans unless it's subsidized, which is the sort of the carrot, which maybe isn't the best solution, but I think it might be more effective if you're depending on what your goals are. If your goals are to destroy unethical businesses, well then yeah, tariffs might actually be a pretty efficient tool of that. But because if you consider that like employing foreign children is a bad thing, then you can use it as a stick to punish them if they want to engage in the ultra lucrative American market, or you can subsidize them and go, hey, come back to the United States. We'll give you extra money. We'll offset that additional $4 million that it would cost you to employ Americans. So that way you can keep your logistics network and whatnot up and running until either you figure it out or maybe the subsidies stick around forever, which is probably what would end up happening. But when it comes to like, and you mentioned earlier, so here, whenever I think about like unemployment and housing and all this other stuff, to me, in my head, there's always like, this feels like this like perfect silver bullet solution, which is construction jobs. That feels like the perfect solution to, hey, we have a large population of people who are struggling to find work, who are around or below the standard, like the central deviation of IQ, right? They're 115 to like 85 IQ people. They can probably work white collar, but there's only so many white collar jobs that exist if you're like above a central standard deviation, right? Because the more like businesses are shaped like pyramids by and large. You need lots of kind of not very highly trained people, and then theoretically you have a bunch of highly trained people at the top. Not exactly how it works out, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
If it's like we need more houses, okay, all right. People, there isn't housing. There isn't like affordable housing. Okay, so if we assume that it works like a normal market, we either need to lower the demand and just slaughter millions of people. Probably not the best solution.
Probably.
Or we need to build more houses. Okay, I can get behind that. Well, how do we build more houses? Well, we need people to build those houses. Oh, so you mean like creating jobs and like
Mm-hmm.
in a world that needs jobs? Oh, who's the most likely to struggle with employment in the current setting and struggle with like that type of stuff? Well, as it turns out, mostly young guys. Hey, what are young guys uniquely suited to do? What's that? Do I hear manual labor? Someone give that guy $100. Like this feels like, and the reason I know this works, actually, the reason I firmly believe that, like, instead of like doing tariffs or doing like any sort of like this foreign policy stuff to try to bring jobs back to the United States, the silver bullet here is to create more domestic construction jobs, and we know it works because that's what Australia did. Australia was going through a very similar issue to us back in like the housing market crash and like the early 2000s when we first started to see this big deviation, and their response was to just like it was to one initially begin to subsidize some construction stuff, and then two tear down a whole bunch of red tape around zoning laws, which they had had similar issues with to the United States. They tore down a whole bunch of that stuff and created tons of construction companies that a whole bunch of young guys got into, and then they don't see the same sort of like issues that we have now with like unemployment and all this other stuff. Like they have their own unique issues because it's a different country and they're gonna have their own problems. But like when it comes to this particular sector, um, of like serious weird employment problems and housing problems and whatnot, like it just doesn't exist as much over there because they chose to like build more housing. So yeah, when you talk about stuff, it's like I get how tariffs a knee jerk reaction. It feels like um, the economic equivalent of like cutting off the wounded finger, where it's like, but it hurts so bad. I just want to just take it off. Just take it off. It's like, no, we can fix this, and it might like have some problems and like you know have some like healing pains, but like there's a solution to it. I'm done with it. I just want it gone. I just want it gone. Or it's like if you're having a disagreement with like a friend, and then your solution is to just cut them out entirely. It's like, well, hold on. Let's try to like face the problem a little bit more head on as opposed to trying to like go for the most extreme possible solution. Because that's what tariffs feel like to me. They're like, and it's not to say tariffs don't have a role. I think tariffs are actually a very useful tool when they're applied properly. I think for national defense, they're a great tool. We don't want people who are very important in our tech sector, think like Texas Instruments, who build like javelins and stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want them going overseas to build these things because I don't trust those other governments to look into stuff. And if other governments are building stuff on American soil, I want my FBI and CIA and uh, DHS looking at all of that. Like this is like the prisoner's dilemma type of deal. Like if China or whomstever is building technology in the United States, I want to know everything about that technology. I want us developing countermeasures as they're researching and developing it here on our soil if they're dumb enough to do that. I would want us to do that. And in the same vein, I would look across the sea and go, I bet you they're doing that, and I don't trust them. So I'm going to look at Texas Instruments, who's trying to make money. And I'm going to go, if you build over there, we are going to charge you through the nose. It will be so cost ineffective, we will have to assume that you are effectively a spy. So I think it's very useful in that sense. I think which is sort of like a protecting American business as well as national interest type of stuff. And I think it can be employed in specific industries to be beneficial to like your average American, but it is a tax. We like to me, it feels like an important step to like figuring out how to properly use tariffs is to realize that they are a tax, and
Yeah.
as a tax, you should like conceptualize them as such, not so much as like a. Which is why I think we should just call them import taxes. I don't know why we don't call them like import taxes. I mean, I know why we don't call them import taxes because it makes people not think of them like a tax. But yeah,
Yeah, they don't like them as
I don't know.
much.
That's my opinion on tariffs.
Yeah, I get that. I think like you
That's
brought
how I
up,
feel.
I
That's how
think
I
like a
think.
like a combination of what you said earlier was the what was it, the Chip Act, where like it's like we
Yeah.
would subsidize the making of the
Mm.
chip. Maybe now, granted, I don't work in government. I'm sure it's more complicated than this, but we could be like, okay, look, we're
You
gonna
would be
have
appalled.
tariffs. We're gonna have tariff, huh?
You would be appalled.
Oh, I thought you said I'd be
I
bald. I'm
think it's
like,
more
I'm
complicated
already
than
bald.
this.
But not
No, no,
granted.
no. It's got to be more complicated than this. Well, bad news. The
So
world is
I
run by idiots who are no smarter than you.
fair, but I think something you could have done. Granted, maybe more complicated, maybe not. Was be like, hey, we're gonna have tariffs in about 5 years. However, if you not specifically like chip manufacturers, but like automotive stuff like that, like you bring your business here, we'll subsidize the building of your business. Maybe instead of like 6% tax or whatever for you need wood, your workers, well people the construction people to build it will subsidize in some way. Maybe you won't have to pay as much in taxes, so much other. That way, A, it brings them an incentive to come over here. And then B, it's not like, as you said earlier, it would cost more to just rework our entire system to do over here. It gives them time to do it, gives them incentives, and probably helps them out. And then not only that, because you said earlier, we need construction people, we need young men who can work hard labor jobs, all of a sudden, bam, they get hired. Once they're hired, then you can have people who are hired and trained to work for whatever factory, so on and so forth. Sounds like a good idea. Might be more complex in nature. I don't know, but again, I don't mind tariffs. I just don't mind. I just don't want them as a retaliatory thing. Like as you said earlier, I don't want to chop the finger off if I can sew the wound shut. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what Congress is about. Congress is about is big, bold, now.
Oh,
And
baby.
and as you said earlier, segue, um, the tariffs are essentially a tax, and the rich people can eat the tax, while the poor people have to create less and less, and it creates this thing it creates two economies essentially, and it's where like the average indicators are no longer meaningful. Like things are good here, they're bad here. It doesn't matter because the gap between the top people and the bottom people are so wide that what's good for top people, bad for bottom people, something good for bottom people, good for top people. Like for example, in our next article, Walmart
We're
reports
all about
stand.
bottoms here.
Oh yeah, we are. Walmart reports. Oh, this is from independent.co.uk. Walmart reports standout. Walmart reports standout quarter under new CEO as wealthy shoppers flock to stores. Walmart has reported another standout quarter as the promised as promise of lower prices and speedy deliveries drew in a broader spectrum of Americans during the critical holiday shopping period, including wealthier households. Da, 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 da. Now, this article goes into like shares dipped here, earnings here. Honestly, couldn't care less right now. Sales rose here, blah, blah, blah. No, but here's the part I want us to look at. Da, da. While inflation has cooled, consumer prices have soared above. While inflation has cooled, consumer prices have soared about 25% over the past 25 years. Many economists expect more companies will begin passing on higher costs from higher U.S. tariffs to customers in coming months. Walmart's promise of lower prices has broadened its base to include wealthier shoppers in that environment, with the biggest gains in market share coming from households with annual incomes over $100,000. Uh, I heard and I've heard reports from different places that a majority of their customers are people who make 100K a year, and to me that's interesting because it spells out a couple things. Like either a even the rich people are like Gucci's getting too expensive. Oh, actually I didn't even think about that. Wasn't there like a report last month that like someone showed that these like Gucci and
Mm-hmm.
Louis Vuitton, they're all like these purses are all in clothing whatever are all made at the same place. Just some of them get the brand name. So maybe I don't know, but maybe some rich people are like, wow, that's kind of cheating me. Let's go to Walmart and get the same product. Maybe. Off point. Like, so inflation, and obviously inflation drives up prices. That's part of life. Um, Somewhere the
And it does
Fed.
it really fast. Google Sonic inflation.
Oh yeah, sonic inflation. That's actually the 34th rule of economics. So
That is true.
look up Rule 34 sonic
Continue.
inflation.
Google rules Sonic inflation. Want to know the really dark side of it? Google Rule 34 Sonic inflation X shadow and
X shadow.
continue.
Continue. Yeah. Uh, and I read somewhere that the goal of inflation, I heard you don't want zero inflation, and the goal is like 1 to 2% is around what they want, but
Mm.
the average has been like 3%, five, and the max 5%. I've heard some reports of like I'm talking about the past like 6 years, like I've heard 7 and 9% in certain places, and obviously in inflation, prices go up, and this results in something called like real income decline. And it's essentially that when the price of necessities like energy and food rises, the amount people can buy, the amount people can purchase decreases, uh, like a tax. So like let's say you make $30,000 a year, and you used to pay $10,000 in groceries every year. Well, prices go up 25%, so that's $12,500 you spend on groceries. And well, let's say you didn't get that raise that year, so the amount you can buy has decreased despite the fact that
Hmm.
prices went up, and now you have even less. It's taxes. It is what it is. So we have Walmart here with people.
We actually talked about that. I was gonna say we actually talked about that a little bit last time with that's how the Fed can kind of help keep the economy from fully tanking because it's better to have people who are paid slightly less than people who are paid nothing at all. It's how you keep your employment when the economy is doing really poorly is because the business is actually paying you slightly less than they were before, and then they can take in their additional, like they can save that extra to keep the business going because it's better to have an economy that rolls slowly than an economy that doesn't roll. You don't want businesses crashing, and you don't want people's incomes vanishing because then they become ultra protective of their money and whatever like cash they have and everything grinds to a halt and that's like worst possible case scenario. So it's better to like go, okay, well, we'll up the inflation a little bit. This is what they do with this is what the Fed does, or at least is their goal. It's like, well, we'll up it a little bit so that way the businesses can offset a little bit so the whole thing kind of keeps rolling, even if it's a bit slower than it was.
Mm-hmm.
But you can continue.
Yeah, I got you. I got you. But I think the main problem is that like this is like a lot of people. I'm sure a lot of people are feeling it. Actually, feeling it. Like stagnant wages. Um, while wealthy people can continue to absorb tariffs and higher just inflation in general. Many quote unquote ordinary workers have seen that their wages aren't keeping up with pace. With they're not keeping up with inflation
Yep.
and tariffs.
Yeah.
Now that might change with the tariffs situation going nuts, but I'm a big believer in money loves stability. So tariffs coming in and going, not good, not helping. Um, yeah, so wages are stagnating, prices are going up, so people can't purchase what they can. Now, I did read an article. I haven't pulled it up, but I read somewhere that Amazon. I think the reason why Walmart has a lot more people with a household combined 100K. I think the reason why they're seeing an increase there is because Amazon. So I read somewhere that Amazon this year, or like this holiday season, for the first time has surpassed Walmart in sales. Like, based on reports. I
Interesting.
could be wrong, but I heard that. Feel free to look it up. But I think I read that somewhere that the Amazon has surpassed Walmart with like either customers or sales amount, whatever. And I think that is a good. Now, granted, I think Amazon is more worldwide than Walmart is. I could be wrong. Take that with a grain of salt. But I think that is another reason why Walmart has seen, you know, 100K people come in, is that Amazon has what's called like an economy of scale. That's when large corporations have the ability to handle large volumes. Then this allows them to operate more efficiently than smaller stores, often resulting in lower prices that attract even more customers. So, for example, not only that, Amazon has been making their own brand. Have Amazon Basics? Have you heard of it?
Yep.
Yeah, like when I
Yep.
got my retro console, comparing the prices of micro SD cards, uh, Amazon has like 5-10% less for essentially what I believe. I'm sure there's more to it. The same product. So, and I always do that. Like when my girlfriend she wants to buy books, we'll go to Walmart. They'll be like $20. Same thing with like Barnes and Noble. They'll be like 20-35 bucks. Whenever she's looking at a book that I want to get her, my first go to Amazon because it's cheaper.
Amazon.
Because things are cheaper. So that might be a reason. Sorry, that might be a reason why Walmart is seeing more 100K people is because the people who make less than, let's say, 50, they're just going to Amazon and buying their gifts. It's cheaper with the way they do like their shipping. I heard that's not good, but don't quote me. Something about taking advantage of the people that ship. I don't know. That was like a couple years ago. I heard that. So, but if you can get something at Amazon, why would you at cheaper? That you can go to Walmart's website and check the price and compare prices. Worst case scenario, but holiday season, you're buying from Amazon. You don't even have to leave the house. The reason why you leave the house is if you need food and drinks. And even then, Amazon kind of does the same thing there. But
Hmm.
so and also to kind of like wrap up my notes before we just talk is that like if this continues, like Amazon continues to have the lower prices, Walmart gets the more and more 100K people. There's absolutely a chance that great value becomes a name brand. Like not Gucci level
Terrifying.
maybe, but like oh
No, but it's
sweet, oh
definitely like a.
you got your desk from Great Value. Oh my god,
Wow, that's so nice.
you must have money.
Right. See, I thought you were gonna go with the sociocultural analysis of like poor people are slowly becoming because this whole thing to me. All right. So I'll start from the beginning. Okay. Whether people realize it or not, this is a personal belief. Whether people realize it or not, America is becoming divided into three new distinct classes. Okay. And there used to be three previously distinct classes where you had your upper class, which was like some small group of like politicians and businessmen, with a few high-powered doctors and lawyers in the mix. And this is sort of like who you ever seen the show Mad Men? This is who it centers around. But this is the upper class that existed in like the 19 probably like 20s. Really, this was like the 1900s, the 20th century middle class, right? The iconic one that everyone talks about and thinks of. And then you had, or the upper class, sorry. And then you had your middle class, which was like your most people were in this range. This was like 80% of the population, with like 5% being the upper class, right? So then you're 80% of the population, the American middle class, right? Sort of the gem of the American economy. And that was basically everyone else, right? This was your um, white picket fence, two-car garage, two kids and a dog, like family.
hmm
And then you had your lower class, which was about 10-ish% of the population. These were like your lower class. I mean, like poor people, whatever
absolutely,
they
yeah,
did.
poverty.
And part of the beauty was like, oh, you could go from being like this underclass because I like part of the beauty was like, oh, you could be this underclass person and then become like middle class. Anyone could achieve the middle class. You just had to work hard and do whatever. Um, but the new stratification is looking very, very different. So you're gonna have and previously, this was back when like the U.S. had like a 90+% um, wealth tax. Like I think at its height in like the 1960s or 1950s, the U.S. had like a 91% like wealth like income tax. Like we used to tax the crap out of people,
Mm.
and we were doing just fine. But it was also a different economy, right? Um, but part of this was like the American middle class, the big thing was what is where most of the money flowed through. They were the biggest spenders, and so they were the ones who paid the most tax. Now we have sort of three new classes. You have your traditional upper class, but I think it's actually gotten smaller. I think the upper class has gone from 5% of the population to probably 1 to less than 1% of the population. I really think we sort of moved into this like very narrow cabal, like sort of like your Epstein class, if you will, right?
hmm
These like people who have found a way to siphon what is it? It's like the top 1% own 90% of all the wealth in the country.
Yep.
Um, like this is your like Epstein class, like your billionaire oligarchs who plan to live forever and control everything. Then you have the next 9% of all the wealth, right? Which is your W2 aristocracy, is what I call them. So these are people who make between 65 at the lowest and probably upwards of like I want to say 500K at the highest, which encompasses, at least as far as pay scale, um, 50th percentile to like 95th percentile. Like the W2 aristocracy is wide pay wise, but actually very narrow, sort of like maybe not socioculturally, but like it's a narrow portion of the population that encompasses the majority of like the distance in the pay scale. And so these are like your white collar and like your I don't even, what would you call it? Like gray collar, like your plumbers who own the business type of
Yeah.
people.
Hmm.
Um, where it's like these are the people who pay most of the taxes because we all know that the freaking Epstein class is not paying taxes
Yeah.
at all
They found loopholes.
because they're in bed with the government. Like there's no world in which these people are paying taxes. So the entire tax system is supported, and this is all personal pet theory, but like the entire tax system is effectively supported by the crazy spending of this like 9% of the wealth in the country, which is your W2 aristocracy. These are the people who literally go like they fill out their tax forms, they maybe have an accountant, like they actually pay money to the IRS every year. Like they go in, they fill out their taxes and blah blah blah. They do their like W2s and their 1099s and their dividends and their interest. Like this is the majority of your tax supportive class, and they're also the ones with the most spending. These are what the middle class has been condensed into, is this very sort of narrow band of the population. And then you're sort of 60% of the like, and the population numbers are sort of the inverse of the wealth numbers, right? So 1% owns 90% of the money. Probably about 30% of the population exists within like the W2 aristocracy because it's like 50th percentile mean or median income, which really means you're probably in like the higher end of earners, probably like the top 40% of earners. So it's like 40% to 30% of the population is the W2 aristocracy, the people who keep the country running. And then you have the rest of your population, sort of the 60 remaining percent, are becoming part of the gig economy permanent underclass. I'm sure you've seen the phrase permanent underclass thrown around a ton on Twitter. And like these are your Uber drivers, these are your Door Dashers, these are the people like your gig economy people. Um, and the whole point of the gig economy is to ensure that you cannot build like long-term wealth. This is like your Amazon driver. Um, the like the way the system exists. I This is what I thought you were going to lead into with the average Walmart shopper makes $100,000, and your um, average like Christmas present buyer shops on Amazon. Because in my head, what that makes me think of is sort of obviously my own pet theory, which is like, yeah, I think culturally the W2 aristocracy sort of prefers to shop in person. They sort of enjoy like it's just a cultural thing. It's like, yeah, they go to Walmart because half of them grew up going to Walmart and now they make enough to like, support maybe their own lives and whatever. And that's where they go. They buy presents there, and like buying things online kind of has like it's just not it just it's just not the same, right? As going in and picking something out yourself physically in person. It also means you can like analyze the product, right? These are people who can afford to spend the time going into a store or they have like a wife who will do it, or they themselves can afford to spend the time going into a store, searching through all these things, taking in 2 4 hours out of an afternoon, not working, buying presents in person, sorting through the ones that they like and they don't like, maybe getting food or something afterwards and going home. Like that's like maybe a 5 to 6 hour ordeal all told for depending on like the size of your family versus spending maybe an hour broken up over the course of multiple small breaks while you're driving around in an Uber buying stuff online because you can't afford to like go spend the time to like stop into a Walmart for 3 hours to buy stuff. Um, because to like that seems like a very like sort of like nicely self-contained, satisfying answer to me, which is where I thought you were kind of going at, with like, hey, it's weird that Walmart shoppers one are making over 100K because it's Walmart, hello, and then two, it seems like poor people are kind of stuck doing stuff like Amazon, right?
Hmm.
Because they don't have the time to do this other stuff. But I don't know. That's sort of my personal pet theory on why we see Walmart shoppers making over 100K, because the only people who can afford to take that much time out of their day are people who one have a wife or a dual income household where their time off might be managed separately, but you're not like out of money if you're not working for the next 10 minutes or next 4 hours. And people who work like your standard 9 to 5s, right? You're someone who works like a standard 9 to 5 has time to go to Walmart and shop for Christmas presents.
Mm-hmm.
Plenty of it because they work a 9 to 5. They work a W-2. But if you're a gig worker, right, an Amazon driver, an Uber driver, someone who works at DoorDash, you're literally living delivery to delivery. Like maybe not literally, but like your income is dependent on your gig performance, right? Every moment you're spending not driving for Uber is dollars you're losing because you've agreed to that. You've signed on to that contract. And now you need to get the value out of the new car that you just bought so that way you get a better rating so you could get more rides so that way you could do it more, right? Like that's sort of your permanent underclass can't afford to shop at Walmart. Not that they couldn't buy the stuff with the money, but that they couldn't spend the time because time is now like much more valuable.
Oh yeah, I get that. I
Which
get
is
that.
sort of
But
what if you I mean, actually that's probably the sorry to interrupt, but that's probably like the best possible form of analysis for this is that like time it literally is the most valuable resource. And as such, like what do we see like a whole bunch of the not to dig into like the conspiracy stuff, but like assuming that they believe it, even if it maybe isn't true, a whole bunch of like the weird ritual stuff, a whole bunch of like the whole biotech stuff coming out of like San Francisco. It's all around extending your life. It's all around buying more time. Um, like time has become, I mean, it always was, but like it's very much now sort of the foremost resource of value. A 9 to 5 means that you are a valuable enough person to where you can regiment your time and go, nope, you only get so many hours of my day. And if you're like a billionaire, and you know you're in the Epstein class, you actually get to decide how you choose to spend your time decides how everyone else has to spend theirs, right? So it's sort of like an inversion of the system. And then if you're a gig worker, your time is not determined by you. You work when you're told to work, or you will suffer for it effectively, right?
yeah,
You'll suffer financially. So, like viewed through that lens, Walmart's a pretty big investment. Four
yeah, yeah,
hours? How many Ubers is that? Upward, like on a good day, upwards of like 5 or 6. That's maybe depending on the time slot, right? If you're doing it in the afternoon when the rides are more expensive, like it's just super expensive for you. It's less expensive for your W-2. And if you're ultra rich, you probably don't think about Walmart that often, except for as maybe to short it or to long it or whatever.
yeah. I get that. I get that. Well, I mean, like my thing is like was more of like again, people's wages aren't keeping up with inflation. We brought that up. Good point that you brought. You made a good point of like, yeah, a lot of these 100K people, they probably grew up, shopping at Walmart. So and now they've made the good money, but their brands are still at Walmart. That's where they shop. My thing is like when it comes to like the Amazon part was more of like if you don't make enough money, but you still want to get Christmas presents, you make enough money to at least make buy Christmas presents. You got to be a bit more self conscious about where you're buying them from because essentially in this economy, every penny and dollar counts. Like, and not only that,
Yep.
Walmart, at least in my opinion, I could be wrong. Please prove me wrong. But it's like it seems they seem to be offering less and less in everything, and more of like specific things. Like we, like my girlfriend, her dad, like he is slash was a professional bowler, but I noticed he never like none of the, like he doesn't have any like of his bowling balls on display kind of thing. They all just sit in their bags, and something about them sitting on the floor messes up the I don't know. I don't bowl, so I'm like, okay, well let's get some like good bowling ball displays. But Walmart didn't have any. Like they didn't have anything bowling specific besides like bowling ball cleaners. So I had to go to Amazon, and even then, Amazon was pretty cheap. uh, Getting gifts for my daughter. And yet sometimes Walmart has good sales, but it's hard like when when the dollars count, it's kind of hard to beat. Okay, well it's 20% here, and I don't like it's not 20% seems kind of extreme. It's 5-10% cheaper on Amazon, and I don't have to get the, get her ready, get ready, wait, drive the gas, blah blah blah. I can just sit and order it, wait for it to show up at the door. And things like that. It's just the point I was making when it comes to, like for like Amazon. It's like again, economy of scale. They seem to be very large, and I'm sure they've only beaten Walmart because of the holiday season. Pretty sure because I could be wrong. I don't think you can get like fresh produce at Amazon. I know like Uber and DoorDash do, but I don't think Amazon's one of those like, oh, I need like 2 onions for this recipe. So I'm sure that'll continue. But again, the Amazon was like, when times are tough, people have to like usually people substitute objects and products like, oh, normally I buy apples, but apples are expensive, so I'll get oranges. Comparing apples to oranges. But instead here it's like, well, I could go to Walmart, things are more expensive, a little bit more expensive there, or I don't have to go anywhere and I can go to Amazon where generally what I'm looking for is like 5-10% cheaper. Generally, it's all should be noted that a lot of stuff that's offered on Amazon that it's like incredibly cheaper and the quality is kind of hit or miss. That should be noted as well. You're not getting one for one product usually. So that's the point I was just making with the Walmart getting more shoppers because, as you stated, wealthy people can go into stores. They can not risk. They can take the 4 to 5 hours it takes to go shopping and go out to eat, as opposed to poor people who are like, I gotta do with what I got. Oh, I'm running DoorDash. I work in the gig economy. I can't go shopping. But I can certainly wait for someone's order to get done. I can scroll on Amazon, buy a product, and it'll be there today or the next day. So that's just the point I was making with the Amazon part. But and segue. Uh, Again, as times. Oh, I'm sorry. Is there anything else you want to add before I segue?
No,
Okay.
you're
But
good.
like again, times are getting tough. The economy's hard. Tariffs aren't helping. Uncertainty with tariffs aren't helping either. I don't care if the Dow's over 50,000, but like the damn. Okay, this article from Lending Tree. Only 20% of Gen Z workers earn enough money to live alone comfortably, and in many metros, it's even worse. It's a long held rule of thumb that you shouldn't spend more than 30% of your income before taxes on housing costs. I want to point that out. I think that is absolutely stupid. That is a stupid idea. I don't like, because when I was looking for apartments, it's like, oh, you need to make 30% of your income before taxes, before, that's how much you need to make before you live here. Like why before taxes? I don't get to play with my taxes. It should be after taxes. That's how much, you know what I mean? Because the college like, oh yeah, because
Right?
if I do something, I do a job,
Or,
and what is it? Sorry, continue.
I was gonna say, or if I have to calculate it based on before taxes, then I should be able to deduct it from my income when it comes to paying taxes.
Yeah,
Like if businesses are allowed to deduct that stuff, why can't I?
exactly. Yeah, but one thing is like, no, like I make 30% more now. I make 30% more if I don't include taxes. I find that stupid. You know what I mean? About 25 30
Uh-huh.
percent of my income goes to taxes. That's stupid. So let's get that out of the way. Back to the article. A lending tree analysis of government data shows that only about 1 in 4 Gen Z workers uh, can meet that standard, and in some metros that number falls to 1 in 10. It shouldn't be surprising that Gen Z workers ages 18 to 27 in 2024, the year the data was analyzed, fall short of that standard far more than their older counterparts. Young people typically make less money than older people, and it's certainly nothing new that teens and 20 somethings sometimes need to lean on roommates, partners, even mom and dad for help with housing. Still, our analysis illuminates how tall a task Gen Z faces today if they want to live comfortably on their own instead. Also, we says they defined living alone comfortably as affording a one-bedroom apartment in the area without spending more than 30% of your gross income. While
What
our
area?
uh, Again, I think it's an average. I know you don't like averages, but I think it's based on area. I don't know. I didn't read their data. That's just what they said. One bedroom apartment in quote your area unquote without spending more than 30% of your income in gross taxes. While
Can I
our
choose what my area is?
while our analysis revealed that most Americans were able to do so, few Gen Zers could say the same. Key findings: just 1 in 4 full-time Gen Z workers nationwide earn enough to live alone comfortably, but the share is much lower in large metros. This might help. Across the U.S., living comfortably without financial help from a partner, friend, or relative required earning $52,040 a year across America. Okay, so I guess there's your average, and only 26.9% of Gen Z workers meet that threshold. In Oxnard, California, 9.6%, Miami, 10%, Orlando, Florida, 10.7%. Only about 1 in 10 Gen Z workers make enough to live alone comfortably. First bullet point. Second bullet point: Gen Z full time workers are less than half as likely as workers in older generations to earn enough to live comfortably on their own. That was a word kind of weird. In 2024, a majority of Gen Xers, 60%, millennials, 56%, and baby boomers, 55%, earned a comfortable living compared to just 26.9% of Gen Z workers. They addressed that earlier. Older people usually make more money. We'll get into that. Point 4. Nationally, fewer than 1 in 20 full time Gen Z workers earn $100,000 or more, but the share is far higher in select west and northeastern metros. Oh my god, I can't imagine. Across the U.S., 4.9% of full time Gen Z workers earn at least 100K, compared to nearly 3 in 10, 29.5, in San Jose, California. The highest share among major metros, San Francisco 20.8% and Seattle 15.3%, also rank near the top, while New York 13% is the only northeast metro where more than 1 in 10 Gen Z workers earn six figures. Information and finance offer the clearest path to six figure pay in Gen Z workers. Blah blah. 6.3% of full time Gen Z workers in information earn at least 100K, the highest share of any industry. That's followed by finance, insurance, and real estate, 12.4%, and professional and business services, 11%. Period. By comparison, arts, entertainment, hospitality, and food services, 1.1%, personal and community services, 1.9%, and retail, 2.5% trail far behind. Wait, is it saying that
There are
2.5%
what
of
percent of people who work in?
retail?
Yeah,
2.5% of retail workers earn
get me in
100K?
there.
Oh man, what? I didn't make that much at Kroger. Wait a second.
Where are they working?
Where
Where are
they
they
work?
working?
Yeah, what kind of retail they work in? Probably like Whole Foods, but
And like Orange County or something.
100%. Um, Few full-time Gen Z workers earn enough to live alone comfortably. Our analysis showed that someone needs to earn 52,000 a year to live comfortably and shop at Walmart without financial help from a
Shop at Walmart.
partner, friend, or relative. However, just 26.9% of Gen Z workers earn that much. That's a far smaller number percentage than we see among older Americans. Okay, which we'll get into later. Okay, that's kind. I mean, in my opinion, I know they said we'll get to it later. That's a little bit cheating. I don't entirely disagree with that, but it's like, yeah, this guy who built four businesses and is 55 years old. Of course, he makes more than some dude just getting out of college. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, now granted, that's not always the case for sure. I get that, but it's still kind of.
The
You
more
hope you.
interesting metric would be like comparing it to a similar age.
Yeah, for
Like,
sure. Like
okay,
at
so
this
this is what,
time, this is what. Yeah.
yeah,
Um.
how many baby boomers were in houses, or how many Gen Xers, or how many millennials were in housing at the same age, right? So the same like under 30 demographic.
Yeah, yeah, same thing. I got you. It doesn't account for inflation, blah blah. There are 18 metros in which 20% or fewer of Gen Z workers earn enough to be able to live alone comfortably. More than half of those are in California and Florida. Uh, oh my God, it's a lot of blah blah blah. They work less,
Um,
not work less, like they make less. This article is just repeating over and over again. Okay. Basically, what we're talking about is 30% of Gen Z workers can live alone. Um, so basics here. Economics is the study of scarce resources that have alternative uses, and high rents and high home prices are quote unquote messengers conveying the news that the amount of housing demanded exceeds the amount supplied at current prices. That's nothing new. That's supply and demand. That's basics. So we can talk about different things when it comes to this. One point I was bringing up was that like the Federal Reserve interest rate stuff, when the Federal Reserve makes policies like such as keeping interest rates around zero bound. For example, that happened about between 2020 and 2022, which was around zero to like 2%. This is
mhm.
a habit of creating like quote unquote winners and losers, like where rich people, because interest is low, um, banks are more likely to lend, more people are more likely to borrow. So because more people are willing to buy, assets go up. That's great for rich people. For poor people, not so much. It doesn't mean anything. They can't buy houses, and they still got groceries to buy. They got a DoorDash for a living. Um, and policies like these have like these primarily benefit the rich who already own houses while punishing those who rely on savings. Low interest rates, inflate prices, creates inflation in a way. Again, this is nothing new. Da, da, da. And what's it called, again, by keeping interest rates at zero bound for years, like the Fed encourages massive borrowing. I already brought that up. Housing, but that creates housing and apartment values, which makes them go up. And because they go up, tenants can charge more. And if people, you can charge more, people sell their homes for higher prices, which may even like exceed the not may usually exceeds the actual value at the time. Let's see. And this is again, the interest rates kept low. Another thing is like we've brought it up. I only thought about this because Gen Z stuff and it brought up New York. It's like Mondani. He said he's gonna freeze rent, and it's socialism, stupid ideas, like and because they say we freeze rent because housing is a quote unquote human right. But just deeming something quote unquote a human right doesn't change the underlying scarcity of it. Like policies that make use price control, like rent control, price control, rent freezing, often make problems worse for people like Gen Z because it reduces housing. It reduces. We talked about this already. You know, if rent freezes, people don't move out. They don't upgrade because it costs more as opposed to just staying where they're at. Um, and you stated it last time was that it discourages construction because if they're not going to make as much money from building the place, they're not going to build it at all. They're not going to take a cut to build a house when they're not going to make the money from it, or apartment complexes. That's a one thing. That's probably a major reason why like it's kind of hard to at least for Mondani's case. I think I brought up like San Francisco. No, yeah, San Francisco, like in the 1930s, something like that. Any thoughts so far?
Mm. No, I'm with you. Build more housing. I don't know why this is so hard for people to figure out. I know San Francisco's been taking some steps to solve it. I know there's a couple other cities that have been doing it. Texas being sort of the beacon of hope in the build more housing argument. Um, But yeah, it's that simple. It's you ever heard the I don't know, if you're chronically online and you spend too much time on Twitter, you're probably familiar with the concept of the fix everything right now button. That's what building more housing is. It's a fix everything right now button. I am of the somewhat conspiratorial opinion that if we were to solve the housing problem in the United States, not only would our economy massively improve, but we would basically stop seeing the political turmoil that we're seeing like right now. There's a I wouldn't say I'm firmly convicted of the fact, but I like to believe that if we were to fix housing, unironically, just about every aspect of American life would improve drastically, and we would suffer basically zero downsides. Like the only people who are going to that's not true. We would suffer one downside and be hearing boomers gripe about the fact that, 10 years ago I could have gotten 1.5 million for this thing. Now it's only worth 40K, which is about what I paid for when I bought it. But you should have seen the prices. Okay, I really should have sold then. I really should. It really wasn't fair, Like, why do I get punished for having a good investment? It's like, all right, Grandpa, you keep thinking housing is an investment, old man. The home is the other direction. Yeah, that's why we're putting you in the nursing home. It's okay. That's the only downside.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they'll probably go kicking and screaming, fighting it all the way, but
And essentially in 10 years we won't have to hear about it. But
yeah.
yes, that's another thing. It's like it's again, it conveys that there's not enough housing. You make a good point. More housing, more construction, more people have jobs,
Also,
more people have homes.
don't ever, all right? People try to hit you with like anti-billionaire, anti-corporate propaganda to try to stop people from building housing, and because they'll say stuff, don't ever let anyone convince you of the opinion that I just don't like that BlackRock is building neighborhoods and leasing out the homes. Yeah, you know what? One, first off, the total amount of corporate-owned housing, including apartments, in the American housing market is like less than 5%. It's like 80 plus, 90 plus percent of the entire market is single, like proprietor owned. Like the market is owned by individuals. Like don't let anyone convince you that like corporations are buying up all the housing. They barely own any of it. And if they're building more housing, all I say is more power to them. I don't care. I don't care if the house I live in is some BlackRock bundled investment thing. You know what that means? It means that an enormous company has a vested interest in making sure that my living situation is up to par. All right. If you've ever heard, there's a people in this vein of conversation. If you've ever lived in a corporate apartment versus a mom and pop apartment, um, the investment that the legal divisions of these groups have in making sure that where you live is up to code is vastly different. Big corporation will throw absurd amounts of money at making sure that your living situation will not get them sued. Mom and pop will ask you to clean the mold out yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like just so we're all on the same page, don't ever let anyone try to hit you with some anti-corporate nonsense about not building more housing because well, what if the corporations control the market? One, they are so far from doing that. And fun fact, the only way they're actually going to get around to doing that is if we don't build more housing. Because you know who's going to buy up all the houses when the boomers die? It's not going to be your broke ass. It's going to be the corporations. So
Mm-hmm.
we're already headed in that direction anyway. One. The only way to stave that off, two, is to let different companies outcompete them in a slightly different market, which is the building housing market, not the buying housing market. Also, housing is an investment, and theoretically, eventually, companies should realize that hey, this wealth generating asset is a pretty expensive thing, and potentially sell you the house, which I wouldn't bang on, but like, I do not ever let anyone convince you that corporations building housing and driving down the costs of housing in an area just to scalp the market is at all a reasonable or valid argument against building new housing. If anything, we need to support these guys, okay? I will give the Epstein class more of my money if they give me a house, okay?
Okay, so I want your opinion on this. So for
Build
me,
me if you Epstein, it's the Kratos meme. Epstein, build me a villa in Southern California, and my life is yours.
so my thing is like so. No, not my thing, but where I've heard because I have heard that like the anti-corp, but it's not so much the whole like they're driving housing prices down. I think it's more so like, now granted, I could be wrong, but we're just talking theoreticals here. It's not so much that they're building houses and the prices are going down, it's that they're building houses, but you don't get to own them. They only rent them
Yeah, it's
out.
leasing, but even leased housing, housing of any kind, leased or otherwise, is still good for the market because it's. Have I explained the pole chain effect of housing? Um, the
No.
way housing works is it's like a chain. So on one end you have the rich people, on the other end you have the poor people, and they all live in different kinds of housing. At the very end you have like Section 8, and the very top you have like New York penthouse mansions, like crazy expensive housing. If you build and we'll assume that most segments on this chain are pretty saturated, right? We'll assume actually right now they're actually totally saturated, which is the problem. Every segment on the chain is totally saturated. There isn't enough housing to go around. So if you build a new mansion, right, huge multi-million dollar property, or you build a new, New York or LA penthouse, right, multi-million dollar view of the city, blah blah, someone who lived in the step down from that, right? Maybe they're not as nice of a penthouse or a mini McMansion in a nice neighborhood, who could have reasonably afforded that, but it was stuck because there was not enough of that market to go around. They'll move up. They'll upgrade because that's what they wanted all along. They just couldn't get it, right? There was a
Yeah.
demand, but there was no supply. So they'll move in, which will then vacate the nice house that they live in. And guess what? Right behind them on the chain is someone exactly like them, just a little bit less rich. They want to live in that like expensive gated community, but they're in like a less expensive, maybe decent community, and they want to live there, right? They want to live in that thing, but they couldn't because there wasn't the supply. So the demand is there, and they move to fill that demand, right? They move into that neighborhood, right? It's maybe that young, lawyer couple that finally got their, we're finally moving into the nice neighborhood out of wherever we used to live. And then in the sort of like slightly nicer, but maybe not super nice neighborhood, well, that house just opened up, and there was someone who's living in an apartment, maybe not Section 8 housing, but like an okay apartment, who's waiting to get their first house. So now they have their first house. And well, someone from the Section 8 who maybe didn't reasonably need to be there or finally got their break, well, they can now upgrade to a nicer part of town. And then someone did that Section 8. And it's like one big chain where it doesn't matter where you pull on the chain, it will pull everything underneath it. So you can build as
Okay.
much Section 8 as you want, and that's probably helpful. But you can build this is another thing that people, because the reason the pull chain effect is now is because when people talk about it, like, well, they're building expensive, they're leasing houses. Okay, but someone who lives in an apartment who would want to lease a nice house will move into that house, and then they'll
Mm-hmm.
open up the apartment for someone who didn't previously have the ability to be in that apartment. And around Section 8 is sort of where you get like just the big pool of people who could fit reasonably maybe into anywhere in the chain, as like new potential occupants. But like and then their next argument is always, well, these are always we we need to build cheap housing, and there just isn't you know space for all that. It's like, well, you can build housing of any kind, like genuinely, literally any kind of housing helps. You can build mansions, and it will make space for a poor person because the whole chain pulls. Now, it might not be the poor person (parentheses you), but it will be some poor person, and if you do it enough. Now, I agree we do have a deficit of like mid-density housing, right? Relatively affordable apartments, but this isn't like a thing that you can only attack by building massive like com block uh, apartment complexes that hold like 700 people and everyone gets their own small studio like that would help. Like I'm sure if you built some of that, there are plenty of people who one need it and two would rather live in that than some other place because they just don't think of housing as something where you put in a lot of value. Maybe they're early on in their right. You're a Gen Z person. Like, I really only need a studio because I'm not in my house a lot. I'm at work. I'm out at nights. I come back to go to sleep, and that's it. And then I wake up. I go to work. I stay out all day, and then I come back and I go to sleep. Like, build any kind of housing, even if it's leased neighborhoods. There are lots of people who would love to be in a leased neighborhood who are right now either the child of someone relatively wealthy who's still living with their parents, or someone who's in an apartment who could reasonably afford something nicer, um, who's been like saving up their nest egg, and for them this is the next step. Like, build any kind of housing. It doesn't matter if it's leased housing. It doesn't matter if it's rent apartments. It doesn't matter if it's $1 million mansions. Literally everything helps. It's the most. This is like if the listeners can't tell, this is like a huge like pet interest of mine of like just build more housing. It's the silver bullet. It will solve all our problems. And if it doesn't, oh my gosh, we'll be so much closer to solving all our problems. Imagine what it would be like not having to worry about housing when it comes to solving all these other problems.
Yeah, I get that.
And
Uh,
it's why I'm against stuff like rent control and all that other stuff, which is antithetical to like the building for more housing.
yeah, yeah. But I think like I think the point that they were thinking was like the whole. No, no, I agree with the sentiment. I just don't think it's as deep as they think. Is like the whole like you will own nothing, you will be happy. The whole BlackRock making
Nothing
houses
could
that
be
you can rent,
happy.
and I'm
Yes.
like you said, like it's less than 5%. I've heard it's even less than
Mm,
1% of how much they own, and
being generous.
so it's like at least for them it's like at least there'll be a place you can live while you potentially save up for a house that you can't own. Now I think when they think of like, oh, you'll own nothing, you'll be happy, is that like, oh, they'll eventually own 100% houses. I don't think we'll get there. And if we do get there, it won't be for a long time. And even if it's in
Yeah.
within our lifetimes, the way our economy works will probably be a lot different anyways. And now
And don't
this
forget,
is kind of personal. So when it comes to like renting, I've heard
shoot.
renting is a pain in the ass cuz like as you stated, like even with like when it comes to like mom and pop stuff, like when it comes to renters, like when my parents moved into a different house, they're renting the
Mom and
house
pop
now.
is the worst.
Well,
Corporate's what you want.
well, yeah, but even like I said, even then with mom and pop stuff, like you like because there are like
Hmm.
renters laws or whatever, but like the garage wasn't working properly. They had to replace the garage. Not my parents, the renters, uh, and all kinds of
Hmm.
stuff. You know what I mean? It cost a lot of money. I've heard that like with most renters, like one of the reasons why rent control is terrible is because it hurts the renters the most, and they would rather not have the business and let the building, you know, do nothing with the building, than it because it would cost money for them
Hmm.
for all like the repairs, to pay the repairman,
Hmm.
to pay the tax on the property, blah 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 blah, and it's like I understand the concept of like, oh yes, like we build all these houses for rent, we get to keep the houses, but it's like yeah, but those houses will deteriorate. They need to be up to code, and especially because you're a business, like
Hmm.
lawyers would come after you hard. So you have to hire a handyman to do the work, but you can't just hire a normal handyman who just YouTube the video as they're fixing your problem. You want
Hmm.
good handyman, and that's a good portion. Now I'm not saying sorry, I'm not saying BlackRock wouldn't generate a profit from that. I'm just saying it might not be as much because, you know what I mean?
Sure.
They still own it. They
Well,
technically
this is
have to take care of it.
yeah.
So,
Well,
again,
this is
I
why
continue.
corporations are sort of more preferable to rent from because they have more money to throw at that stuff, right? Mom and pop don't have the same amount of money to throw at their renters, which is why, or their rentees, which is why they're like, oh, hey, my faucet isn't working. Yeah, all you have to do is this, this, and this. Hey, no, I want you to fix my faucet. Well, it works. You just have to do. It's why they like, even though there's renters laws, mom and pop shops are more likely to try to dodge those because it's a much more costly thing for them to fix your garage or to fix, whatever. Because to them, that's like they probably don't have as many tenants, right? They probably have maybe like six tenants, and a tenant needing like a $10,000 garage or whatever it might cost. Um, like it costs like $5,000. That's like 6 months of that person's rent. Like that's a huge bite out of whatever thing they were trying to do. If you're a corporation and you've got like 60 rental buildings, like apartment complexes across like 10 different cities, and one of them needs like a faucet fix or even like a garage thing or their basement floods. I mean, yeah, you're still gonna go through like the corporate, deny, defend, depose, blah 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 blah. But also like, oh my gosh, that's like factored into cost of business. That's a rounding error for
Yeah.
like a company of like that size, right? For a company of BlackRock size, oh, you need a new garage? Sure, we'll send out a guy. Or we'll send out like a professional crew, blah blah blah. Because it's less than a rounding error to us. Like we're worth billions of dollars. You think we're gonna like our housing department is worth hundreds of millions. You think we're gonna sweat over you costing us 10K that much? Like, sure, we're gonna fight it a little bit and we're gonna haggle some because we're a business and that's what we do. And if we can get out of spending extra money, we will try. But also, it is just not economically worth our time to try so hard to risk getting sued by you and potentially going from losing $10,000 to $100,000 or some other larger sum of money that still means not as much to us, but is more costly. So we're going to try to keep it down. It's just cheaper for us to not fight you on it and just hand you the thing because who cares? From what I've heard, I've never
Yeah,
rented,
again,
I've never
again, that was kind of
been a
personal.
rentee. That's
I
just what I've heard.
mhm. Yeah, I've heard things like again, that's kind of personal. I don't know if it's entirely true, but I've heard that renting is a hassle. You do make some money, but it's not like oh, I'm gonna charge them $1,000 over what I pay. It's like you make like $200 or $300 a month after the rent, and but you still gotta pay people to like plumbers, construction, handyman, taxes, stuff like that. So I've heard that it's not much. That's why you need a lot of renter properties to live off. Does that make sense? But again, that's personal. Not entirely sure. But yeah, so Gen Z, that's your answer. Build more stuff. Build more houses. Supply and demand. Basics. But yeah, I think we'll call it there. Well, any last
All right.
words?
Um, nope.
All right, sweet. All right, well, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.